For the Trump agenda. Let's talk Brexit and more with Gardner Harris. He is the State Department correspondent for the New York Times, and Michael Allen is managing director with Beacon Global Securities. He served in the George W. Bush White House for 7 years in a variety of national security and policy and legislative roles. Gentlemen, very good to have you. Gardner, let me begin by asking you, can we generalize, is it fair to generalize on the departure of Mr. Cohn, a former Goldman Sachs player, big hitter there, and Mr. Tillerson, that business people don't work well in this cabinet? Or were there just particular policy differences and reasons that happened to mean that these two ex-businessmen get shown the door?
Look, I think it's taken us a long time to learn this, and we have to relearn it again and again and again. You know, business and politics are wildly different. And I think the people who really have trouble in politics are in many ways the sort of the Rex Tillerson kind of imperial CEO model. Politics have a variety of different power centers in Washington. You know, you really have to manage. Rex Tillerson's two big jobs really was to manage the White House and to manage his department. And he really didn't do either of those very well. And, you know, we heard constantly that he was really sort of frustrated by the lack of clear authorities in the administration. Mm-hmm. And that's something that really bothers business people. You know, you have a clear chart of who makes decisions in businesses. But, you know, in politics, those things are much more fluid. You've got the Jared Kushners, you've got the, you know, McMaster, you've got many other people are involved in a much more collaborative decision-making process, which of course includes the Congress as well. And Rex Tillerson never really got the decision-making chart that he liked. And he often really was poor on the politics. You know, he almost never went up to Capitol Hill. He didn't manage the White House. He just didn't get it done. All
right, let me turn to Michael and get your thoughts here. If you have a Secretary of State, the senior member of the cabinet, with whom you have seemingly fundamental policy disagreements over such things as trade, Iran, TPP, and more, and you are not including that individual on consequential decisions, it would seem, like deciding to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un, isn't it time to go? Isn't this probably for the best for both parties?
It's definitely for the best, especially in Washington when your power is how close are you to the president. That's where your authority derives from. And when people around the world and in Washington perceive that you are not with the president or that there's a gulf between you and the chief executive, you don't have any schlitz. You don't have any power. You don't have any moxie to be able to get the job done. But also, look, I think Rex Tillerson's a good man, but he was probably the least adaptive Secretary of State or businessman to come into this particular role. He liked to study in his so-called God pod, as it's been reported. And I remember one of his advisors telling me at the very beginning, I said, why isn't the secretary getting around town, going to think tanks, going to the Congress? And they said he believes he needs to study and report quarterly, just like he did when he was a CEO. And that just doesn't work in Washington.
Gardner, we are focused so much right now on Rex Tillerson and his interaction with the president, North Korea, the foreign policy role. Natural, because he was Secretary of State. But another core reason he was there was the reorg, call that the reduction in the size of the State Department, which was incredibly controversial, made people within the State Department very unhappy. It seems to me, though, that legacy is kind of done. Hasn't he worked really hard at that and actually gotten a smaller State Department?
He has, although I don't think that anybody really can talk about how he's done it in any kind of strategic way. You know, he's just sort of shrunken it. And I think that I think even
what if the shrinking is the strategy? What if the shrinking is the strategy?
Right, but Michelle, I mean, I think what you want to do is you want to shrink it over here, but not shrink it over there. For instance, you know, the Security Department of the State Department is now by far and away the largest. Of the 75,000 employees the State Department has around the world, 45,000 of them are security guards, and they actually need more. You know, Mike Pompeo, who's coming in, he made his bones really going after Hillary Clinton on Capitol Hill about the Benghazi attack. He believes security must be bolstered around the world. But Tillerson really was trying to just get rid of everybody, and a lot of the top security people left as well. So that sort of didn't make sense. I mean, Tillerson just had a tin ear. You know, I was with him on his last trip to Africa, and we were talking amongst us, why are we going to Africa when the South Koreans are coming to Washington to brief the president about their conversations with North Korea? That is by far the most important thing going on in the world right now. It was Tillerson's biggest agenda item, and he wandered to Africa when the most important thing on the North Korea problem was in Washington.
That seems like a poker tell of how distinctly he had been exiled from the policy-making thing. I want to come, Michael, at Michelle's question from a different angle. Sure, Mr. Tillerson wanted a smaller State Department staff. But I believe that there are multiple positions on the State Department staff. There is no ambassador to South Korea right now, as I understand it. There is no assistant or deputy secretary for Near or East Asian affairs. The senior official who knew the most about the bilateral relationship between South Korea and North Korea recently quit. Aren't those absences concerning, or are they?
They're very concerning. And look, it's symptomatic of a larger problem that the secretary had. His board, so to speak, is the White House. He did not have the confidence of the president or his senior advisors. He couldn't get his own personnel through the political clearance process. And so they just allowed it to stalemate and key positions to go vacant. That makes absolutely no sense. To me, it doesn't really make business sense. It certainly doesn't make political sense. And when you're focusing on a reorganization, that's not what the secretary ought to be doing. He ought to be out reaching out to our allies or otherwise advancing the country's objectives. And so I think he was too insular. I think his agenda was too small, and he was allowed to be defined by budget cuts that he did not.
All right.
He was not seen as fighting.
All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Michael and